Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ChatJSB. I am Chris Shepard, and today I am not the only one who has an organ, although Peter Edwin Krasinski is sitting at his piano, but he is an organist extraordinaire, and he is the very first organist who will give a recital for the complete Bach. And it's really appropriate because among the many other things he does, in fact, it is many, many other things, isn't it, Peter? He has many different hats, many different jobs, and gives recitals, and something special that you'll hear about in a second that he does all over the world. In addition to all of that, he has recently been appointed the curator of the magnificent Hook organ at Mechanics Hall, one of the most special things about this most special of venues. And you will hear about that. Before I introduce him to you, I also want to say the thing that I think is the coolest, which is that if you have seen the movie The Holdovers, which you all should see, Peter is the choir director at the beginning of the movie, which is pretty cool. So I don't know, maybe his agent won't allow us to air this, but I hope that he will, Peter. And we are so glad to have you as such an important part of the complete Bach and here with me today on ChatJSB. Now, what I know about you is you are not afraid of talking. So I'm just going to wind you up and ask you first to talk about how wonderful it has been to become the curator of this really magnificent organ at Mechanics Hall. Over to Peter Krasinski.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And of course, we have Johann Sebastian Bach right here looking over us and making sure that we do everything as well as we can. So my position there is the principal organist. And I have had a relationship with Mechanics Hall and the city of Worcester for a very long time. I know that they have an amazing American Guild of Organists chapter, which has always been welcoming and intelligent and musical and full of fellowship. And I've always enjoyed that part of the city of Worcester. I'm from Boston myself, but I have connections also in Providence, as well as here in Boston and in Worcester. And the thing that makes that particularly amazing at Mechanics Hall is that everything has just come together so beautifully. It's a beautiful hall with a world famous acoustic, and it has this 1864 Hook Brothers organ, fondly known as the Worcester organ, that was built just specifically for that space. It was originally put in. I believe that if you were to purchase that organ with the same amount of money they spent in 1864, it would equal about $5 million in today's money. So they really looked upon the organ as an important part of the Mechanics Hall Association, and that it was considered, you know, the top of the line mechanical thing back in 1864 is when it was built. And it's a magnificent instrument, just been restored lovingly, and it's been taken care of beautifully. And we have lots of wonderful programs there that feature it,
including the program that you will play on Saturday afternoon, the 26th of October. And we want to hear all about that. It is not only is it a great program of music by Bach, but you bring a theatrical flair as well to your programming. And I'm wondering if you could talk not just about how that applies to that program, Peter, but how you've come over the years to realize that we can bring so many different senses to these performances that we do.
Well, I've always been someone that has enjoyed music as a human being, not just as a musician or as an academic. However, I feel that academic knowledge of music is very important and can inform performances that enlighten everybody. And so that's one of the reasons I enjoy utilizing entertainment, sort of a fun way of presenting each piece that might expand it a little bit in different ways. I can talk a little bit later about where I came to be this way. But first, about the program itself, I just want to give you a nice little overview. We're going to start with the toccata from the Toccata Adagio and Fugue. That's BWV 564. And that starts with a wonderful section that has this incredible keyboard part that's very fun. And it just goes on and has so much fun. Then the next part uses the pedals. And today I'm playing that on my piano along with my grandfather clock ringing away.
It's like the bells of St. Thomas in Leipzig, isn't it?
It is. And then finally, the third part of the very beginning, the toccata, has this great little motion of upwardness, of joyful ascent. You notice the genius of Bach is he's put it first in the soprano and then in the lower voice, the same exact thing, incredible amounts of structure. Now, what's going to make this very special as the opener of the concert is we are going to have images from space. They're going to be visually impacting your senses while you hear each one of those three things. The beginning will be rivers, and then with the pedal, we'll probably have pictures of mountains and volcanoes, and finally some gorgeous pictures of cities from the space station. I'm partnering with a wonderful fellow named Dan Barstow, who used to work for NASA in their education department, and he's able to help me put all these things together. So that's just the first piece that we're going to get to hear. And maybe we can stop there and talk a little bit about something else, and I can tell you more about the program as we progress. Does that work?
That's great. And I was also wondering, Peter, because we're so early in this Bach project, I'm producing a number of podcasts to help people understand more about the music of Bach. Can you talk about toccatas in general? Because they're so important to the organ repertoire, aren't they?
Well, it just means touch. To touch. It's this excitement of having the ability to use your hands to touch the instrument, to make the instrument come alive, and to communicate. And all sorts of toccatas are in this sort of idea. It's almost a sensuous thing, where you're using your hands to say something physical to someone else or to an entire audience. And when it happens with a big audience, when that sort of touch happens, even from the quietest clavichord, which I know we're going to hear from over the next few years, to the harpsichord, to the piano, to any keyboard instrument, the idea of touch is an amazingly important one. And I think we're realizing in our modern world just how important touch is when people really need some encouragement or some help. That whole idea of touching is a really strong idea to me.
Especially post-COVID, we learned the importance of touch when we couldn't, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Peter, I'm wondering, I talk to everybody that I speak to in this program. For so many of us, we come across Bach at such a young age, but he is such a hurdle. And it's interesting because you talk about touch and literally touching the keyboard. Those pieces are difficult to play. Did you fall in love with Bach from the beginning, or was it something that you had to come to terms with as a player?
Well, I was sort of lucky, and I was sort of forced into it because my birthday is March 21st. And
Yes.
so it was something that I knew about for a long, long time. And in fact, in my teens, I wish I still had it, but I have three older sisters. They're all very beautifully visually artistic. And one of them actually created a letter for me on my birthday. I think I was about 14, that was from Bach.
Oh gosh.
And she took this paper and did this manuscript. Of course, it was in English. It wasn't in German. It had a love stamp on the front of it, but she put it in tea and burned the edges around it and talked about how Bach enjoyed hearing my mother and I playing cello and piano together as he would fly over the house occasionally. And so Bach has always been part of my life, sort of in a personal way. But beyond the organ, Pablo Casals was someone that I was a big fan of. My mother was an amateur cellist, so
Oh,
I would
nice.
always be hearing her playing those pieces, the suites, yeah, it's just sort of an obvious thing. I also cannot go on without mentioning two very important figures in the organ world, and that would be E. Power Biggs and Virgil Fox. Many people went either one way or the other. They said, "Oh, Virgil's too showy. He plays slush boxes, meaning the big electropneumatic organs that maybe the academics didn't appreciate how they were sounding." And then, of course, E. Power Biggs wanted to have mechanical organs and sort of played Bach his way. But I never could take a side. I never had any trouble at all enjoying hearing the same piece played 5 different ways on 6 different instruments. And so that was something I grew up with too, collecting these things that nobody knows about anymore. Well, I guess they're making a comeback. The LP, the long playing record, and E. Power Biggs did an amazing job going to Europe and recording organs that originally Bach would have been familiar with, and really that helped to form my basically a big well of appreciation for how his music can be played on any instrument. And I could go on and on and on about even Hammond organs can play Bach, handbells, steel drums, jazz combos, the swingle singers. The world of Bach is just enormous, and it's about the notes.
Peter, this is a really great point, and I'm not always able to articulate this, but you are very articulate, so maybe you can help me. What is it about Bach's music that is at once both totally idiomatic, or his organ music is totally idiomatic to the organ, and yet when you hear Canadian brass do the toccata and fugue in D minor, you think, oh, this sounds like it was written for a brass quintet. How is that possible to be both at once?
It's superb writing. It's superb composition, which of course he was an expert at, having been a transcriber early on in his life. He kept on writing other people's music and seeing how it all went together, and he really became arguably the ultimate Baroque composer in terms of him taking all of that information and transferring it into sort of this distilled process. That's a long way of saying the music itself is convertible. It can go anywhere. You can even alter the rhythms of these things, but still keep the voicing the same, and it all comes together. And you will hear a little bit of that going on during this concert. In fact, one of the other things in the concert is a silent film. And the film is The Boat with Buster Keaton. And it's about a family man who wants to create a little boat for his family. And he has lots of trouble with that. And it's pretty funny. But the other part of that is, for the soundtrack, I'm going to be employing familiar melodies that you would know, oh, that's Bach, and that's Bach, and that's Bach. And the other part of Bach is he's a great communicator. His music, even without any text attached, always creates some sort of mood. You have just right away, you're in one place. Or you're in a different place. Completely different world, a universe, but it's unmistakably something. And I think this is why it's able to go across so many different styles, genres, and ultimately last forever.
You mentioned the silent film, and I'm curious because this is such an important part of your career. How did that happen? How did you come to play theater organ? Was that from an early age? Just why don't you fill us in on that part of your history?
Well, I always enjoyed having music being part of an event, even if it was in junior high school. Bart Petrarca coming in from gym class or something, I would play something on the piano. And also my sisters that I mentioned earlier, they would do funky things with me, like they would play the sunrise scene from Daphnis and Cloy, and we had a big room that had lots of windows, and they'd pull all the shades down and tell me to lie down, and then they'd play it on the record player, and they'd open the curtains. So I was so lucky to have this wonderful influx of connections to music, not just hearing the music, but experiencing it on lots of different levels. Now, in terms of the silent film thing, I used to do watercolors when I would listen to music and sort of make this attachment. Now it's reversed. I watch the film and I memorize what's happening in the story. And then generally, I simply improvise to what the film is trying to say, sort of like a, a supporting actor. I try also to become somewhat invisible when the film is happening and be a supporter of what the story is, not try to call attention to myself. However, this event will be a little different because we will be seeing a comedy and you will be recognizing some interesting analogies towards what's happening on the screen, towards what music is going to be played. Film has always interested me. I had the great pleasure of actually meeting John Williams when he first appeared on the scene in Boston. And I remember giving him a cassette tape and telling him I wanted to write for movies. And he looked at me, and at that time I was somewhat athletic and had blonde curly hair. And he said, "What do you think about staying in a room under a lot of fluorescent light for a long time?" And I think he realized that my kind of spirit just didn't maybe have the patience to actually write for film. But he was nice enough to listen to the tape and send it back and send me an encouraging note. And of course, that could be nothing but positive to have someone of his stature actually notice that somebody's interested in that. And then there was a place called Hammond Castle up in Gloucester. And Hammond Castle has a big pipe organ, a private pipe organ. It's, I believe, under restoration now, which is extremely exciting. It's not a mechanical action organ, it's an electro-pneumatic, I would call it a collection of pipes, but a very exciting collection of pipes in a wonderful place. And at Hammond Castle, they ended up bringing me in maybe 3 or 4 times a summer to accompany a film. This is way back in the days when it was real film, and you had to get it through the distributor. And on Friday, I would come up from my school job in Brockton and sit and watch the film, write down some notes, go out and have dinner with a nice glass of wine, and then come back and play the film. And that's how that all started happening. And I started developing my own way of processing the images on the screen that would go into my heart, into my brain, and then come out of my hands and feet to hopefully create something that's organically entertaining for the people watching it.
When you say that, it makes me curious. Do you feel, I love that you included the heart in that. Do you sort of almost feel like you're channeling something? How conscious are you of what you're about to play? What's that process?
You know, sometimes people say, "My goodness, how do you do that?" And I just say, "I'm old." And it's like, it's not really anything more than experience. But yes, actually, for many years, I've been fortunate enough to be sort of a natural improviser. That is not to say that music was easy. For me, reading music was extremely difficult. I probably have a touch of dyslexia, and I did have some problem with my eyes that I didn't know I had. So reading music as a kid was extremely frustrating, and it was kind of tragic because I had to make a decision. Do I really want to spend all this work to do something that's so hard to do? And of course, music won. And I do read music. But I also want to say, for those people out there that think they can't improvise, that's not true. If you really are passionate about it and want to learn how to do that, there are ways to go about using your strengths. Perhaps your strength is sight reading. You can use that strength and then put in different notes and find ways to change things and make the melody different, and that you're on your way. I think listening to improvisations, other people improvising, is helpful. And also the theme and variation form is a great way to start if you're interested in learning how to improvise. I hope I answered your question. I don't know if I
Yeah,
did.
no, it's fantastic. And you know, just for the people watching this, both Peter and I spent many years as teachers, largely in high school. And I was always struck by, I think that the instinct in music teaching is to place more importance on the literary aspect of it, the ability, the literacy, the ability to read. But in fact, these kids who both of us taught, who were great improvisers, that's in a way a more profoundly music-based musicianship. And I'm glad now that I do think that the classical music world has come around to that, to saying that improvisation is an important part of what we do. But for organists, Peter, it's always been a thing,
Yeah.
right? And I've always played in churches, though I'm not a proper organist, but we have to improvise all the time. Tell me about your experience as a church organist and how much improvisation has been a part of that.
Well, it's absolutely true. And of course, lest we forget that Bach was such a good improviser that when he was in the contest with somebody else, I know someone will remember this name and I should know it.
Louis
He
Marchand.
Louis Marchand, I guess Louis heard him practicing and took off so that he wouldn't have to compete the next day with the great Johann Sebastian Bach. In terms of church, I grew up in many different worlds, musical worlds. The concert hall in Quincy, Massachusetts, actually, we have a civic orchestra, and I listened to that orchestra as a kid a lot because my mom was in it. But also, my mom would take me out of school to go to the Boston Symphony. She would just call in and say, "Peter's not coming to school today," and we would play hooky and go listen to Leinstorff conduct. So that's another part of it. But in terms of the church and the theater, Stoneham Town Hall has a Wurlitzer in it. And I remember being a really young kid and going to see silent movies accompanied there by Lee Irwin and Gaylord Cotter and a lot of very famous people known in the theater world as good improvisers for film. But in terms of church, that was really where my heart was most of the time. I was in a little congregational church in Quincy, Massachusetts, that had a big 4-manual organ that I really was obsessed with as a child, and joined the choir and enjoyed doing that, and eventually got a job working there, and realizing that things don't always go as planned. Sometimes there's something's going to happen. I remember a woman passed out once, and at that point at Bethany Church in Quincy, we were on the radio, and it didn't look like she was doing very well. And the minister turned around and did this, like make something up. And it was very silly because I didn't know what I was playing, really. It just sort of came out. And my mother said, "Did you know that you played Nearer My God to Thee during that emergency?" I said, "Whoops, I shouldn't have done that." But so
And
that's
what is the latest bride appearance you've ever had? Because sometimes
okay.
we get stuck improvising for a while.
An hour and 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
An hour and 10 minutes. It was hesitation step. It was didn't start until an hour and 10 minutes later. And fortunately, I didn't have anything else to do, and I'm a nice guy. But that's not going to happen again.
No,
Yeah, it
but
definitely
when
won't
you
happen.
played through every book you happen to have on the organ. Now, Peter, you and I are of a similar generation, and it strikes me, silent film was between periods at that point. Like there hadn't been that huge revival that people like you have actually helped to usher in. So how did you manage to begin to make a career out of this? Were more and more organs being restored and they wanted to be able to show films?
The interesting thing is, um, I'm not afraid to play a silent film on any kind of instrument. I'm not just tied into the theater organ, although the theater organs are very important because of their provenance in the film industry. They were created to accompany silent films. And we must remember that silent films actually never existed. They were called photoplays. We know of them as silent films, but people didn't think of them as silent because there was almost always some kind of music happening. I would say that Hammond Castle had a big influence on me beginning the craft because it was a place I had known again as a kid. My parents were wonderful at bringing me to places that didn't cost very much and were nearby, but elevated my sense of otherness. Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is another place. No organ, but still a wonderful music program. Um, and in terms of the film, it just sort of began to be something that developed, and that I began pursuing just more and more and more. And people would actually hear me play a film and tell somebody else, and then I would go somewhere else. That ended up one of the more important times for me for that would be when Mark Nelson, who works for the Fisk Organ Company, had a church job up in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I would play a film occasionally. And one day he said, I think you should probably go to Japan. And he brought the organist from Minato Morai Hall, which is in Yokohama, to see me play Metropolis. It's a two-manual Fisk organ, little tiny thing,
Oh, wow.
but it packs a wallop. And you know, if you know how to pull things out and push them in, you know, no pistons at all, everything was all hand done. And we thought, well, you know, she'll probably be available to come on a Sunday night, and we'll just show her the movie and you can play it. And I think earlier that week he said, hey, can we put this in the paper and see, you know, maybe somebody will come. I'm like, nobody's going to come and go on a fishing. You know, people have to work on Monday morning. You know, they're not going to come on a Sunday night. Well, it sold out, and it was a big event, and that's how I got to play in Japan. She invited me the next year to come, and that
Is there
started.
a big market for silent movie in Japan?
And there's some more and more there are festivals that are happening all over the world, including in Japan. And it's interesting to see how there's varieties of different sort of ways to accompany a silent film. Of course, you could simply do it on the piano. There are people who are superb at finding the original music. Believe it or not, there were composers for some of these
Oh,
films.
oh, I
And
didn't know that.
yeah, there would be a first reel, second reel, third reel. And in the first reel, there'd be a thing called a cue sheet. And the cue sheet would have a melody written with what time it is in the movie and what you're seeing on the screen. And then it would be another melody. And it was up to the organist or pianist to fill that music out. And that's just some of the movies. It's a complex industry. Some of the movies had full orchestral scores written. But something early on in my life didn't always like those scores because I'd be watching a film and seeing, I don't know, a dance scene and hearing the Blue Danube. And although the credit was given to one composer at the end, it was really a mishmash of music that was being regurgitated back into the movie that fit a scene. Not necessarily bad, but I thought it would always detract from the film. Like, gee, if I wanted to hear the Blue Danube, I would go to a concert, not go to this film to see it. And so that's when I began drawing on my improvisational skills. I can create a piece that sounds like the Blue Danube, but nobody will say it was the Blue Danube. They'll say it was a waltz, there was a dance scene. I don't remember what the melody was. And I love being able to do that, you know,
Yeah.
sort of giving the attitude of a piece or the feeling of a piece. Like if you're going to take the toccata and fugue in D minor, you could easily create something completely different, but it will feel the same. I mean, upside down and backwards, right?
Yes,
But it
yes.
still has the same drama, right? It's just not.
And I do love, I actually really resonate with what you're saying because I think of growing up with the Bugs Bunny cartoons and the problem, and it's awesome. I mean, I learned so many classical pieces through that, but you're right that you either think about what the classical piece is or what you're seeing. They don't, it doesn't retreat into the background the way that in
I'm
improvisation.
sure Wagner wasn't thinking "Kill the Rabbit" when he was writing his Valkyrie score. I'm
One of my
sure.
favorites.
Yeah.
Peter, as a way of circling us back to that beautiful hook organ and Bach, I was wondering, could you talk, because not everybody on this, watching this will be the organ geeks that you and I are. Could you talk about the difference between these theater organs and a more conventional pipe organ? Because that difference is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a major difference between pipe organs, and that is they're either mechanical action or electropneumatic action. It can be more complicated, but let's stay there. Um, Electropneumatic action wasn't invented necessarily by Robert Hope Jones, who was an English inventor. However, Robert Hope Jones in the late 19th, early 20th century really started developing this idea of being able to play pipes using valves and electrical impulses to magnets that would open up the valves to let the pipe speak. Why? Because the mechanical organs were getting bigger, and when they got bigger, they would be harder to play because there was more air uh, against the palate. So, not to get too complicated about it, basically, there are two types of organs. Fortunately for me, I get to play some really nice ones from both worlds. The mechanical action organ, the Mechanics Hall is a mechanical action organ in that when
Appropriately enough.
you press down the key, it opens a valve. However, it also has a device uh, that is called a Bacher lever. There was a fellow named Bacher that invented a device to help assist you when you play a key. It would help with a pneumatic to push the valves open elsewhere in the organ. So you're actually, it's doing exactly what your finger is doing. An electropneumatic organ, when you press down the key, it's like a doorbell. It's either on or off. It's just like a buzzer. It's you push the key down, it sends an electric signal, it lets air in the pipe. But in the mechanical action organs, literally when your hand goes down, you have control over opening and shutting the pallets, which are opening to let the air into the pipes. The thing is that a Wurlitzer organ, I play a Wurlitzer organ at the Providence Performing Arts Center. I'm a house organist there. It's a 1927 instrument. Very happy to say that it just recently received a matching grant, and we're hopefully going to restore that organ to its original condition.
Oh, wow.
That organ is electropneumatic, and it has something you can't do with a tracker action organ. There's a chamber on this side of the room and another chamber on that side of the room. So you can fill up all of that space. I can literally move people's attention by shutting one bunch of swell shades and opening the others, and the sound literally moves across the room all over the place. I can have different instruments and different sounds coming from both of those different areas. That's not possible to do with an electropneumatic organ, with a tracker action organ. However, they both have wonderful, wonderful properties. There are very large mechanical action organs that work very well, including the one that I'm very familiar with in Yokohama, which is a Fisk organ in Tomorai Hall. It's a magnificent hall and a magnificent space. So I hope that helps to sort of delineate the differences. And of course, the theater organs were built for theaters. Were built for accompanying silent films, partly because all these theater owners were getting tired of paying full orchestras all that money.
Yep. Yep, that'd be right. And these are quite literally all the bells and whistles.
Literally, they have actual sounds. Whether you hear a tambourine or you hear a drum or a triangle, it's a real tambourine, a real drum, a real triangle, a real marimba, a real xylophone, a real boat whistle. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So
So I always wonder about this with proper organists, not people like me. When you go around and are on different organs all the time, how long does it take you to get enough used to a new instrument that you know not just where the boat whistle is, but that it even has one? I mean, this is a process, right?
yeah, it's a process. There is definitely something you're going to expect, and that is a keyboard, maybe a pedal board, maybe two keyboards. Stops you either pull out and pull in, or stops you push down. Maybe you'll have a thing called a capture action where you press a button called a thumb piston. You can adjust and make the stops change, or maybe not. When I was first in Finland, it was really fun to be there to help a pipe organ encounter and also the Sibelius Academy to talk about and teach for a week silent film accompaniment, all of that stuff. I did not see an organ for 10 days that had any sort of piston at all. Even if it was an electro-pneumatic organ, pretty much it was pull out the stops yourself. And it was very, very fun because I was challenged. Like I had to play, what was it? Hunchback of Notre Dame on an organ with absolutely no assists. Fortunately, it was a 3-manual organ. So while I was playing, I could set up one of the manuals for the sound that was coming up next and then jump up to it and then change the other manual while I was playing this one. And it's good to be able to use your feet as well to help fill that in. Again, I don't know if I went off the tracks there with the answer, but
No, but you know what? I think this is actually really fascinating to people. And it strikes me that we actually really do have a lot of expressions that come to us from organ playing, like pull out all the stops. And that was literally, without the pistons. And just, I'm not sure that we ever said this, but a piston, just you press a button and a combination of stops that you have set comes out.
Now here's what's fun. I got to tell you, at Mechanics Hall, there are no pistons, but there are pedal spoons. And they're actually piano and forte for each of the keyboards, except for one. So it actually is, it's all mechanical though. So when I want to bring in more suddenly on the great division, which would be the second keyboard up, I push down this thing sticking out over the pedal board and the stops come out, but I'm physically making them come out and it's a fixed thing. And if I want to suddenly make that keyboard quiet, I press the piano combination and it's physical and it takes a lot of oomph to do it. I'm always afraid I'm going to break something when I use them, but they are very handy. So people were thinking about this issue for a long time. I mean, I could go on and on and on about clavier-col organs in the French tradition, which had ventals. You would set up the stops ahead of time, but the ventil for those particular stops, meaning the supply of wind to those pipes, would not be on. And then when you got to a certain point in the piece, you could just push a one lever, which would then open up that windway to those pipes and suddenly have a much louder sound. And again, press it closed and it would be back to your original sound. People have been very imaginative with the pipe organ over the centuries to try to get the organist to get the sounds that they want to get.
Well, and it strikes me, and this says a lot about Bach and his brain, because of course he was also famous as an organ designer, not a builder, but designer, and he would test them. The organ was always at the center of new technological developments, wasn't it, Peter? And so a lot of the organists that I know also have a bit of an engineer's brain in order to solve these problems. And I love that we now, and I hope that you're going to use that that foot changer. I'm not, what is it called?
I actually don't remember. I'm just calling it a combination pedal.
So will we see you? You will. So we'll see when your foot goes a little bit higher and you step down on that in the concert. I think that is absolutely terrific.
Here, come back on again. So yeah.
That is wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about a couple more pieces before we wrap up here that people will hear in your concert?
Well, I've chosen 3 of the Schubler chorales. They were chorales that were published at the request of a fellow named Schubler to do 6 pieces that were beloved from Bach's cantatas, transferred as organ transcriptions. This is something that people have to understand. Bach was not a snob at all. He was like, oh gosh, sure. One of them is this beautiful piece. The Wacht auf, which is simply wake up. And the second one is based on the beautiful thought of the Annunciation, which is the Magnificat. And it has this incredible, I wish I was playing an organ for you, because it begins with a dance. And that's all Bach. And then he has the Magnificat over that. And then the third one of those is Come Jesus from Heaven to Us, which has this beautiful little happy sound. Very, very cute and happy stuff with the melody in the pedal. Might sound familiar to is this. They're probably related, praise to the Lord and the chant that's used. I'm using those three shublers, and I'm going to have imagery based on European art that matches those. So we have imagery from space for some of the pieces, and imagery from art that highlight the liturgical meanings of these pieces. Another piece that is going to be very exciting is, in fact, the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. But I won't spoil the surprise for all of you. I will just say that we have a very famous conductor who will be conducting me on the screen while I play that piece.
That's awesome.
And I would call that a very advanced parlor trick, which I enjoy doing. And that will be finishing off the concert with, I think, something rather unusual and I think very pleasurable. And again, here we go. There's a conductor who's going to be on the screen, and he was famous for doing transcriptions of Bach with orchestra. And I've decided to go full circle and bring back that transcription and take what he has done with the original Bach for an orchestra and then bring it back to the organ. So it's a complete circle, and that will finish off our performance.
I love that. And Peter, I know from our own discussions that you and I share a great love of the music of Bach, but we're also both incredibly evangelical about Bach's music and this idea that it is music that makes you feel. And so for so many people, Bach can feel opaque, and how do I get into it? So I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us for the fact that you're bringing in other senses. I think it helps people to get into it. And as much as you and I love the organ music of Bach, for people who don't hear the organ a lot, the organ can also feel a bit opaque and somehow different. But during these 11 years, we're going to hear everything. And so to kick this off and to have you back year after year, hopefully often incorporating multimedia, I'm going to finish with the way that I finish all these conversations with my Bach friends, my Bach-Freunden, which is this. 2 pieces, your desert island pieces, Peter. What is your favorite Bach piece you've ever played? And what is your favorite Bach piece that isn't for your instrument? Though, as I said to you earlier, there's a twist here. As an organist, particularly who incorporates the music from other instruments, there's no Bach piece that you can't play on your instrument. But I'll throw you the question in any case.
I'm going to start with the last question first. There is a point when an organist needs to put their ego aside, and they need to realize, actually, I shouldn't try to do that. And that is because you've asked me the question, which I usually don't like to answer. I don't even have a favorite color. I certainly don't have a favorite composer, and I don't have a favorite pair of socks. They're all my friends. Oh, and certainly not a favorite organ. Let's not forget that. However, the St. Matthew Passion is it for me. For some, it's the B minor Mass. For others, it's a simple, maybe the Arioso. All of these are beautiful, beautiful pieces that are just extraordinary examples of what human beings can be and what human beings have been. And for me, the St. Matthew Passion really nails that, if you'll excuse that expression.
Oh, gosh, yes. That's a terrible pun.
Terrible pun, but I can't help myself. I'm an improviser. But the beauty of it is there's still a little bit of hope in there that show the grief of humanity when there is violence. And I think that's really important at this time to remember that Bach is joyous, but Bach is also a human being that knew what was going on. And so that's the piece that I would want to, if it had to choose one. In terms of a piece that isn't for this or the instrument, I just think there's so much to choose from. It's hard for me to say anything, but I love the dance music. I love the French suites.
Mm,
They're just on any keyboard instrument, but
yeah.
particularly well played with a historical reference in an historically informed way, because they combine what we were just talking about. If people are a little bit put off by churchiness, or the organ is a church instrument, or I had a bad experience with that, I'm sorry if you did, because it can be a great experience. Um, but you know, the French suites are just so fabulously elegant, perfectly put together, and so varied and just beautiful. So I guess I would have to go with that as something I sit amazed and just dumbfounded when I hear someone playing those well.
Do you
I'm
know,
really,
it's funny, Peter. First of all, any answer with Bach is a great answer, but I particularly love that answer because I've come to think, why are we giving children the preludes and fugues from the Well-Tempered Clavier to play, which are so difficult? You know, the fugues are, until you have a certain kind of technique, they're so difficult. Why aren't we starting them on the easier movements from those suites? They're just, yeah, I think they're terrific. Let me finish with, I am going to thank you, but I also want to ask everybody's indulgence and apologize. I had to keep turning my audio off because my lawn people usually come on Wednesday, but we are recording this on a Thursday. But Peter, you are so beautifully articulate. I didn't want to stop the conversation. So if you heard any rumblings, it was
I think
not
that
a 32
I think
foot
it was
on.
somewhere between a B and a B flat.
Yes, it was not particularly pleasant, but my lawn no doubt looks beautiful now. I cannot wait to see you do this program, Peter. I'm so excited about this. So excited to have you as such an important part of this project. We are all in Worcester excited to have you as the principal organist on that magnificent hook organ in the beautiful Mechanics Hall. And I just want to thank you for being here. And everybody else, come back for the next Chat JSB. And with BACHtoberfest around the corner, I will see all of you very soon. Thank you to Peter. Thank you to all of you.